we got to get some Linux out. So here it is. All right. So here's my little talk. Let's do it. Present mode. Oop, there goes my camera. Okay. All right. So the data and graphics department, led by this man, believe it or not, me. This is what I used to look like before COVID. My wife calls this my Bible salesman photo. Now, after about 9 months of what we've all been through, and I think including yourselves, I now look a little more like this. Shout out to all the Twin Peaks fans out there. You know who you are. And this deck is one that I prepared for an internal presentation at the LA Times to kind of explain what our group does to our peers. But I also use it to introduce our team to people all around the world and in a lot of different venues like this one. But because of that, some of the things that I included in our internal presentation have been redacted from this talk, okay? But if there's anything you really want to get into, I'd be happy to share it. And I won't give you the full thing. We'll keep it a little shorter. So what is a data and graphics department? Well, we have kind of a mission, I like to think at least, and that is to create digital journalism important to our readers using data, development, and design. And what's really key for us at a newspaper is that, now in 2020, we're now trying to primarily focus our work on digital products, right? As opposed to just print products, which had been the legacy of the LA Times for, more than 100 years prior to the, the popularization of the internet. But in today's day and age, our department is almost exclusively focused on creating digital journalism using these skills here. And that means that people on our team, they're reporters, they're editors, they have a lot of the classic skills of journalism, that people did when they were creating other types of products. But they're also computer programmers, because to make the kind of things we make, you have to be able to move around large amounts of information, acquire it, shape it, organize it, analyze it, and then present it, right? And as I think everybody on this call knows, computer programming is a really handy way to do that. And so there's a way in which the conception or the fundamental skills of what it takes to be a journalist have really fundamentally changed in the last 20 years, particularly when it comes to graphics and data work. We have a little less than 20 people on our team. Here are their smiling faces. Some of them are products of the Cal or Cal State system. Others are from out of state like myself, and others came up through other California educational institutions, but we're a young team. We're the most diverse one at the LA Times, and everybody has a different mix of skills that help us do data, development, and design. Some people are stronger at different parts of that kind of stack of skills than others, but we all kind of make it work and make things happen together. I like to think of a newspaper as kind of like an information factory. It was really a creation of the industrial era in the 19th century to manufacture sort of refined information. All the crazy things that happened in the world were refined down into this product that made sense of it for you and entertained you and educated you and engaged you. And over time, there became sort of systems, right, to produce that kind of thing. The front page of the newspaper every day, the photos that are in the sports section, the box scores that appear next to the baseball recaps. These are all products of kind of, metaphorical information assembly lines, right? And for more than a century, those were refined and developed really around producing a print product. But now, in our new kind of internet era, that factory, it's the same factory floor, and a lot of the same people, but we have to be metaphorically, retooled to produce different types of products than we did in the past, right? And to sort of meet a different market and a different consumer that we did in the past, right? And so I like to think of a lot of how our department has been reorganized in recent years as sort of installing new assembly lines to create a new sort of fleet of products that the LA Times didn't make in the past, and then trying to sort of staff and create a sort of system and organization of people who can keep that assembly line running and get stuff done, right? And to me, there's kind of, it's difficult to totally categorize these because these are kind of emerging products that the sort of are being invented as we speak before us. But to me, there really are kind of three major categories or three types of products that we make that in my effort to try to build a taxonomy and extend my metaphor as far as possible. So here are the three, and we'll go through them one by one, and I'll show you a bunch of examples of each and kind of talk through the skills that go into it, right? So the first one is applications, sort of broadly speaking, as a piece of software, right? The second one is visual stories. And the third one is digital designs. So 1, applications, 2, visual stories, 3, digital designs. Let's do it. 1, applications. So what do I mean by that? It's a pretty broad term. Here's what I mean. I mean, it's where we gather and refine data to serve our digital audience. We write pieces of software that go and get data, do something with it, and then serve it up for people in a way that isn't a traditional story, but is more of a web application or other type of tool. Examples will help. So like for us right now, our top application is our California coronavirus tracker. We have more than 60 pages and hundreds of charts and all kinds of websites, web things that are sort of updated live throughout the day, every day, and have been now for more than 260 days with the latest data about COVID and its spread in the state. That includes the total number of cases, the total number of deaths, hospitalizations, breaking that down by county, by zip code, by city where possible, getting into the testing and positivity rate and all these different data streams that help us create sort of like a living, breathing portrait of the current status of COVID in the state, and then also put it into context by bringing other pieces of data in. And so these are not, stories in the traditional sense, right? They're sort of web pages that are populated by data that automatically update, that have a templated look, right? That we have effectively created kind of a software pipeline to keep going. And this is kind of our major initiative at the moment. It has been for some time. It is the most popular page in the history of the LA Times because there's just so much interest in this. And it shows that when you have sort of these data-driven apps that aren't traditional stories, but that really address and give people more information than they can find in a standard story, right, it can be much more popular. Other examples would be our California live wildfires map. So there's all this data that comes from a bunch of different government and private sources that track the latest location of wildfires in the state. A lot of it actually comes from satellite imagery, which is pretty cool in outer space. And these data sets are kind of like mishmashed all over the place. And when you have to make a map, we might stay up till 1 a.m. to like find the right data set from the right bookmark or like scrape this site or do that, whatever. And making maps and analyzing fires has often been this kind of like smash and grab process. So what we decided to do a couple years ago was to automate our access to all those data sets. We wrote web scrapers, which are open source on GitHub, for 5 to 10 different crucial data sources tracking wildfires from all these different places. And then we tried to integrate them into sort of one live dashboard that provides what I think is still the most kind of comprehensive look at what we know about fires, strictly looking at the data at any given moment. And then this dashboard becomes itself kind of a news product, but more than a traditional, but different from a traditional story. Okay. Couple other examples, quick. It's not always like a web app. We have a thing called QuakeBot. Every time an earthquake is detected by USGS, they send out a little data packet, and we have an algorithm that reads every data packet, decides if it's newsworthy or not by looking at the magnitude and the location, and then automatically writes this blog post. The map, the headline, all the text, automatically written from a template and shot into our content management system to be reviewed by a human before it's published. So we're able to write these sort of basic earthquake posts about significant earthquakes within a minute of the earthquake having been detected, which saves us a lot of time, gets the news out there, lets reporters focus on more important stuff, right? Other examples would be like our police killings database. We track every killing of of someone by police in LA County, and that itself is kind of its own standalone page. And databases like this and the COVID tracker are not just their own standalone product. They can also be the sort of data resource that you turn to do enterprise analysis to try to get after the news. So because we had been tracking COVID so carefully and had built our own independent database, we were able to do this analysis and this sort of step back piece to look at some of the mistakes that were made in the early days of COVID. And then in the case of the police shootings database, we had a case here in Los Angeles where a young man was killed by sheriff's deputies following a bicycle stop. There was a question, how common are these bicycle stops? Do they frequently lead to police shootings? What's up with these stops? And because we had built this database of all the police shootings, we were able to find that, hey, there were more than a dozen of these over the last decade. And it's not just an isolated incident, right? And then the product here is a more traditional news story, but we would never have been able to do it if we hadn't assembled all that data, right? We also did election results. Okay, thing two. Thing two is visual stories. And so here's where I want to talk about making something that's related to what I showed you before, but a little bit of a different product, right? It's still about taking the raw material of data and refining it into something, right? But it's a slightly different thing. And I think you'll recognize this from other news outlets, right? And this is what I call it, a visual story, because there's not really a good name for it. So if you have a better one, I'd love to hear it. But what I really mean is where we're going to report and design visual coverage using data often that is substantial enough to stand on its own. So traditionally, graphics departments would create a chart that would be a supplement to a traditional story. There's a front page story, it's 1,600 words. It has a headline, a byline, a date time, and a big blob of text. And then if you put in an extra effort, maybe a photo and maybe a little bar chart, right? Graphics were kind of supplementary traditional stories. But in a visual story and in kind of today's graphics world, the visuals are challenged to be substantial enough to stand alone so that the story itself can be entirely told through kind of graphics with just a little bit of text and other things, right? The New York Times excels at this. I'm sure you've seen some of it, right? So examples from us would include this coverage of Kobe Bryant's helicopter crash. So when Kobe's helicopter crashed near Calabasas earlier this year, on day one, we were like, let's just make a simple map that shows you where it is. On day two, it was, well, let's see if we can track the helicopter's path from when he took off to when he landed and just figure out what data is there that we can figure out what happened with this flight. And after we had assembled that data really quickly, we realized that a key element of the story were the final moments of the helicopter flight before it crashed, when, according to the data we had gotten, the helicopter, went up suddenly and then mysteriously did a U-turn and then crashed into the side of a hill. And we had this raw data that like showed that, and we saw that this was this crucial moment in the flight, and we wanted to help people understand this final chapter of this important event. And so what we did is we made a series of very simple, because we only had like one day to do like the whole thing, right? We made a series of very simple sort of animated charts that took that data and put it on top of like a Google Earth kind of thing and broke it into steps, into like chunks. And you have like a 4 or 5 chapter story here that guides you through those crucial moments, helping you understand it through visuals, right? As opposed to just writing the whole thing. Other examples would include analyzing election results to look at the local precincts, neighborhood by neighborhood, to help people understand why an election turned out the way it did. We do our own independent social science surveys sometimes. Here's where we actually went out with a clicker and watched how many people were wearing masks in a bunch of locations and presented our results in sort of a visual package. Here's an example that didn't really have sort of structured data of the traditional sense. This is where during the protests in Los Angeles last summer, there was a lot of examples of police abuse coming out in social media, and we kind of tried to aggregate them and then put them into context to help people sort of get a broader, more overall view of what happened, right? And this is part of why I call it a visual story and not a graphic story or data story, is a lot of times the best ones of these are using photos, videos, things that aren't, bar charts. We do it about other stuff too. All right, now my third and final assembly line, like I was talking about, is what I call digital design. And as you could probably tell, the types of things I've been showing you require not just data analysis skills, but also web development and data visualization skills, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, stuff like that. And those skills make our team kind of a little bit of a boutique web development firm within the LA Times. And, as part of the newsroom's operations, we produce a small number of kind of flagship products every year that aren't data and graphic stories. These are things like our annual list of 101 best restaurants, or, a 6-part serial called Dirty John, which I bet you someone has watched or listened to on this call, right? Or different things that aren't necessarily data and graphics related, but would benefit from the boost given by a custom digital design to help really kind of cut through and reach the audience. And so our team also produces that kind of thing. And so examples of that would be like, we did an obituaries package about dozens of people who've died from COVID here in California, and that was given a custom design. We had a recent piece on DDT dumping off the coast of Long Beach. That was sort of a long read story with lots of sort of videos and photos. And this was the custom topper that was on top of that. We did a package earlier this year about the Chicano moratorium anniversary, which was a Vietnam War protest in East Los Angeles. had 5 or 6 different stories, which we gave a custom design and a custom cover page and this kind of magazine treatment. Things like our voter guide to help people prepare for the election a few months ago had, a little custom countdown clock, which was then also on the homepage. And all these types of things, like I'm showing you, require, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, all that stuff. And so our team does a lot of that as well. We have another one coming up about at the end of the year, which we're calling it 2020. It will be kind of a visual recap of everything that happened this year. So I got a lot more talk here that is sort of like inside the LA Times stuff, but I don't know if we totally need to go into. But just one other topic I wanted to hit real quick is just to point out how crucial open source software is to what we do. If you go to github.com/datadesk, which I'm going to do right now, you'll find the public GitHub profile of our department, which I'm now on the private version, but it has, dozens of open source repositories that we ourselves have published and contributed to. So one data science tool that I was just using earlier today that I bet people on this call are familiar with is the Jupyter Notebook. So the Jupyter Notebook, or it used to be known as the Python Notebook, is a little interactive environment for writing data analysis projects, but also sort of memorializing them and documenting them so that other people can read them and they can be reproducible. And so we have published dozens of Jupyter Notebooks on GitHub in our notebooks repo, where you can read the work of myself and my peers. Here's a fun example that we worked on last year, which was a gender analysis of every spoken line in every Star Wars movie. And this is the data analysis that looked into that, is available here. Here's where I scraped Deadspin. I bet there's a Deadspin reader on this call too, if we asked. But a lot of other ones. And so Jupyter Notebooks are a big part of what we do. They make it really handy for us to share work, document it, and edit things really quickly and go back on them. It also allows us to make our work transparent so that we can share it with the world and build our credibility and contribute to the field. During COVID, I've actually become a contributor to IPython, which I'm very proud of. I patched one little bug. That's my one contribution. So Jupyter Notebooks are a big thing we do. But then, we also participate in data gathering in an open source way, as opposed to software building. So all of the data files that are generated as part of our coronavirus tracker, many of which we do via hand data entry, and is quite laborious. All those CSV files, comma separated spreadsheets, are published every day automatically in this open source repository where we're making the raw data available to anyone who wants access to it. This has allowed us to collaborate with other news outlets across the state to sort of share in the load of doing the data collection. And it's also allowed our peers and academics and others to use the data for other uses. The University of California, San Francisco uses this data set for their own epidemiology analysis. There's groups like the Advancement Project and others use it to do investigations into disparities, and we're sort of helping to contribute to the world by putting the structured data out there. And there's other examples like this. One of my favorites, though it is not for everybody, is California State Campaign Finance Database, which is known as Cal Access, is the database that tracks all the money in California state politics, which is a little bit my white whale. It's such a nasty database that no one can conquer it on their own. And so we've created a group called the California Civic Data Coalition, which is sort of a neutral grant-funded group that is gradually writing the open source software to be a sort of refinery and processor for the raw data released by the state in a big gnarly bulk dump. You can find that at californiacivicdata.org. And as part of this process, we've had byproduct successes, like we invented a bulk data loader for the Postgres database, which is now pretty widely used by people in other fields. And there's sort of spin-off benefits of this type of open source investment beyond just the individual project. I could go on and on about that kind of thing. Open source is probably as close as I come to organized religion, but I don't want to bore anyone. And I've gone on for about a half an hour. So maybe this would be a good time for me to chill out and hear what questions you guys have, and let's talk for a while. Okay?
I have a question. as
Yes.
an editorial data scientist, do you do a
Mhm.
significant amount of you say like metadata for LA Times? Do you collect data for LA Times? Like I saw somebody ask, do you do data based on um, if an image, like the way images are presented, does it get more clicks? Does it some
Mm.
in that direction?
Um, our team doesn't do that, but I could. So it's a little inside baseball or inside our world. But our team, as sort of a component of the sort of newsroom of the LA Times, mostly uses our skills to sort of like find and tell stories, right? Which is a little different from other teams that like operate our actual core website, right? Or do data science for marketing and analytics to help us build our subscriber base and retain subscribers and all that really important kind of data science that gets done for business. That kind of stuff is done by other groups, and we know those people, we love those people, but it's like if it like the actual like core latimes.com, the homepage, the standard story template, all the asset management, like that kind of thing, that's done by a team that's known as kind of the product team, right? That manages those things. And then there's actually a team called the data science team that is separate, that checks out our subscribers data and helps us better reach people. So if there was something happening about like metadata on like the core assets and images database you were asking about, I think those product people would know more than I, but I doubt there's anything all that fancy happening there.
I have a question.
Please.
Yeah, so since you're a data scientist, I was asking you like I wanted to ask how would you rate how much coding you do versus the amount of like data analysis you do?
Totally. Well, I mean, uh, I'm the lowest form of human now. I'm a manager, guys. So I code less and less every day, but I do still code quite a bit. And I think that in our world, it kind of depends on the person, but there's sort of, I would say there's kind of broadly two toolkits that we use. There's kind of your offline data analysis toolkit, that you use to gather data, to organize data, to mess around with it kind of offline. And we don't have any rules or anything, but people tend to do that either with Python and Jupyter and that sort of set of tools, or they do it with R and that sort of alternative set of tools. And I think it just depends on the person, their preference, their experience. And so I call that coding. I don't know if other people would call that coding, but that's one type of coding that we do. And then there's sort of the web development side of things, which is a separate but related set of tools where there's kind of two different segments there. There's when we're building static websites, like these visual stories we were looking at tend to just be like one page with a bunch of assets, right? And when you're building like a single static page like that, there's a whole set of tools from the Node.js kind of universe that are pretty good at kind of putting together kind of basic web pages. And we have our own custom system for doing that in Node. And then if we're going to build a database, something that's flowing, that has thousands of pages drawn from database records or is more complicated, we tend to do that just out of preference using Django and sort of the Python database driven sort of tools. And so I would say most of the time myself personally, I'm writing Python or I'm writing um, web development stuff in a simple Node static site system. It's kind of one of those two things.
Hi Ben, I have a question.
Okay, go ahead, Gil.
I wanted to ask, what are the things that you normally see in other visualizations, like common mistakes that people make that make certain visualizations unrelatable to other people and things of the sort?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of ways to screw up a chart, and I've probably made every mistake myself at one point. But I would say, to me, the big difference between a well-executed kind of journalism story, like a visual story, like I was showing, and sort of the typical thing that you can do off the shelf, is having a clear message for the audience that you demonstrate with data and with graphics, and then sort of like support and dig into and help people better understand. I think it's really easy now, once you learn a little R, to just sketch 20 charts, right? I'm not saying that's not important. I'm not saying it's not part of the process. It is part of the process, just like throwing the data up and figuring out what the story is. You have to explore the data. You don't want to, know the story before you've even looked at the data. But once you kind of settle on what the story is, like, hey, this data shows there's a racial disparity in COVID, right? And where COVID is being contracted. Once you kind of figure out that finding, I think the key mistake or the key weakness I see in a lot of just like stuff that's out there in notebooks is that the piece never really gets edited to really have a headline, focus in on that story, and then really sort of shed all the extra stuff. To me, that's more important than like your y-axis labels or whatever. You got to have a story. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm going to jump in here with a few questions that have been accumulating in the chat for those that are not going to do the audio thing. So I think one of the things, Ben, that everybody during your presentation was super interested in is how exactly you made that look like NCSA Mosaic circa 1993 on Apple.
It's not real high tech, guys. So like you've seen my Linux desktop, so I don't have any fancy tools. I still live my life on 8 gigabytes of RAM like your grandparents, you know what I mean? So there's nothing too fancy about it. Basically, I found a screenshot of it that was in some internet archive, and I cropped it to 16:9 or whatever the ratio is that Google wants. You can upload an image as a background in your Google Slides. And so then you just set the image as the background. And I had sort of the outline of a browser with a blank white space in the middle. I did all that in GIMP. Thank you very much. And then you just fill the space with screenshots. And so it's a little bit of it's a copy paste job. It's rank memory.
Well, certainly got a lot of comments in the chat. So more detailed wise, I have a question here from Spiro Sudas. I've heard in conversation that the LA Times has some of the most accurate election polls for the 2016 election. He might have 2020, but I'm not sure. Was there anything in their methodology that they cite for this?
Yeah, this is a bit of a can of worms, and as I think most people here know, election polls and forecasting are sort of a hotly contested topic. But I'll give you the short overview of how I see it, though I think there are alternative opinions out there. 4 years ago, the LA Times partnered with some social scientists at USC to do a panel poll ahead of the Trump-Clinton election. And as you probably know, most polls are done by calling a bunch of people on the phone over a 3 or 4 day period. And every time you do the poll, it's a different set of people, and you take what you can get and then model it out. This poll was a little different in that they pre-established a sort of large pool of people ahead of time who agreed to participate in an online poll. And then, some fraction of those people, a third or whatever, were logged into the website and gave their current feeling on the election every few days. And so you had sort of a rotating tranches of people from this predetermined pool giving their updated opinion consistently in the run-up to the election. And so the method was a little different in that way. That poll consistently had Donald Trump ahead in the overall popular vote, the projected, overall percentage of people who would vote for Donald Trump. So in that way, it predicted he would win. However, if you're a close reader of election results, you'll know that Donald Trump did not actually win the popular vote in 2016. He won the election despite getting fewer overall votes than Hillary Clinton, thanks to the Electoral College. And so there's a way in which the poll was quote unquote right by saying Trump would win, but it was actually quote unquote wrong in that it did overestimate his popular vote support, actually more so than some other polls. And so, you can read that how you like. It's a pretty interesting question. We did it again in 2020, though the USC did it on their own, not with our help this time. And they did something else that was interesting is in addition to asking people how they personally would vote, they asked people how their friends and family would vote. And this is a new alternative way of asking the question that some pollsters feel will elicit more truthful and forthcoming responses from respondents. And interestingly, that poll projected the popular vote to be much closer than their traditional question did. We have a page up if you want to look at that. I have yet to closely evaluate that against the actual results, but the alternative new way of asking the question was indeed closer to what the result will be.
Sweet. So I have just two more that are in the chat waiting, and we can open it back up to those who else. So one of the ones that's kind of been hanging around for a while is that Martin Gaffrey wants to know, like, what kinds of things, what kinds of aspect of data science work do you dislike? What aspect do you find most enjoyable, and how to deal with the demotivating stuff?
You guys are trying to get me in trouble. I love it. The tough questions. Hey, if you want me to start throwing bombs, I will. I'll just say it. I don't like R. I find it a little sloppy and not as sort of connected to the fundamentals of programming, which is why I prefer Python. I think it's just got a little more discipline to it and is more broadly useful. So there you go. I just started lighting stuff on fire. But I don't dislike R though. I think R has a wonderful community of people that bring so much enthusiasm and positivity and are so, open to newbies. And that way it's a little like an evangelical religion, but still a nice and friendly one. I think I love data analysis. I don't have too much bad to say. I mean, I think it's kind of related to what I said before when people kind of make a few quickie charts and think that's enough to convince people or is qualified to be presented to a broad non-technical audience. I think that that's a challenge. And I think that bridging that gap between people who are really comfortable working with data and have a lot of domain expertise in the area that they're sort of analyzing and the sort of general public is a really important challenge that, our team is one very humble attempt to try to deal with. And I think that there's so much talent in the data science world. And I think that things like computational notebooks and all these new developments are a really great step in that right direction. But I guess the thing that kind of bugs me is if people think that we've done enough. You know what I mean? I think that there's so much more to do to make the product of this stuff more accessible and to make the to lower the barriers for entry for new people to participate. Like, I love Python, but I hate installing anything with Conda, you know what I mean? And I think that there needs to be so much more done in terms of documentation and making things easier for beginners and then polishing the products that those things create so that they're closer to being ready for a general audience.
Sweet. I am all in favor of bashing Conda.
I'm a Pip ENV guy. Pip ENV all the way because I got into this through web development, so I tend to use that side of the tools from that side of the fence.
No, Docker is the future, dude.
Pip ENV, I'm still there.
All right. So Angela Wang asks, Ben, I'm just curious, what usually gets you and your team started a certain topic, saying, oh, that's really interesting and we're going to explore it more? What?
Totally. There's no one way. There's not one answer to that. But, one thing to keep in mind is that, we're a commercial business and we also have a sort of an imperative to serve an audience that's paying us money. And we also have one cool thing about working in journalism is you have other imperatives too, which is covering things that matter, that justify why we're protected by the First Amendment and are allowed to nose into everybody's business, And so these are sometimes conflicting, but often complementary kind of imperatives that help us kind of judge what we're going to do. The way I have decided to organize things is to just try to focus our team on sort of major storylines of coverage that we know are important to our audience, that we know are important journalistically, and then try to assemble groups to create the products we showed you before. So at any one time, we want to have 2 to 5 kind of storylines that we're developing pieces on. Right now, those would be like COVID. We just got done with, tons of election coverage. Police shootings is another one of our major coverage lines. We have a new DA coming in next week and we'll have a piece with that. And we try to kind of identify what are those major storylines and then put together coverage plans related to them that say, well, what applications can address this storyline? What visual stories can address it? What are the major events coming up that we want to plan around, like an election, right? Or like the new DA being sworn in next week. And then we try to tailor things to that. And so Some of those things you can plan ahead of time, like an election. Other things you can't, like COVID or Kobe's helicopter crash. And so we kind of always have to keep our eye out for new emerging storylines to address with coverage. Like the protests over the summer were an example where we saw this is a storyline that matters. And we tried to spin up, let's do 3 to 5 things. Let's make it happen, And that's where the data science team comes in, actually, the people in the other side of our, looking at Chartbeat, looking at what our readers are into, that helps guide those decisions, though doesn't totally govern it.
Cool. Okay. But at this point, because as I said, I would only throw out a couple more. I want to let anybody else that wants to chat directly with you in for a second, and then I've acquired 5 or 6 more chat questions. Let's let the people ask themselves if they want to.
Hi. I had a question about data access issues. So how often might you run into an issue where a certain company or institution that's outletting data, or maybe not, they might say, no, we don't want you to access this data for whatever reason. And when you do run into that, what's the next step? Do you just drop it, or is it just you try
What do
to
we do? How often? Your question is how often do we run into that? Every single day is the answer. It depends. When it's the government, we can often deal with it through a Freedom of Information Act request. So the Freedom of Information Act laws, there's one here in California called the California Public Records Act, are truly beautiful things. They are radically small d democratic in a way that virtually no other law is. And they basically say that any person has the right to ask the government for access to public records. And the government has to produce them under certain conditions with certain things exempted, et cetera, sometimes with a cost. But the fundamental fact of the law is that if the government creates it, it's public unless they prove otherwise. And that applies, people often think of that when it comes to Jimi Hendrix's FBI file, right? Or emails and memos sent by the governor. But it also applies to public databases. And so if the government has data, we know they have data, collect it, and they don't put it out in their data portal, they won't give it to us if you ask. You write a letter on fancy letterhead, though you don't really have to. You can really write it in an email, and you say, I want this under the public records law, and that kickstarts kind of a process. Do you always get what you want? No. Is it slow and painful? Yes. Right. But it does often work. And it could begin a negotiation to get them to give you something else. Also, there's another technique we use that I bet people in this class are familiar with. It is called web scraping. This is where you write a computer script that will sort of spider across the internet, not unlike Google spiders do, download a bunch of stuff like, say, data tables, right, on a bunch of paginated pages, and then train the spider to pluck out the data and put it into a spreadsheet for you. And so I was doing a little bit of that yesterday because I have a story that I'd like to do on the side. We'll see if it ever happens.
Thank you.
What do you use?
Is there another question that we wanted to take?
There was a web scraping question. What do I use for web scraping? Yeah, there's 2 main tools. I think it depends on what type of website it is. Every website is a special snowflake. And so learning to web scrape is really kind of learning some basic skills that help you sort of karate chop whatever weird website you need to get at. If it's an easier website and it's just like flat HTML that you just need to grab and parse, I'll use a Jupyter Notebook, like Python requests to go get the page. I like to download all the pages before I parse them, so I just have them all. That's like one of my little favorite tricks. I'll do that in a Jupyter Notebook. And then I use, because I'm old, I use Beautiful Soup to parse the HTML. But there's many other ways to do that. Now, there are many web pages that try to prevent you from scraping, or that use GASP, ASPX, or these other awful sort of dynamic page generation tools, which you can't scrape the traditional way. That's when we'll get into browser emulation. And there's tools like Selenium in Python or Puppeteer in Node, which will actually spin up a actual web browser to go to the page and click the button you tell it to. If you want to scrape YouTube, I think you have to do this. Yeah, and there's some sites that require that. But we try to avoid that because it's just harder. It's more work.
Yeah, I've used Selenium before.
Yep. So we have a Selenium scraper on COVID for the state's prisons cases. So there's a lot of cases in California state prisons, and the only way to find the numbers is in this gnarly, like, embedded like iframe dashboard that's a total piece of junk, and there's no CSV download, there's no table, and so we have to have a little Selenium thing go every night and like walk through this weird dashboard to grab the data.
Thank you.
I had a quick question. I was wondering, so it's kind of like two questions, if that's all right. I was wondering, how often is the data that you're acquiring from web scraping? And I was wondering, is there like a immense pressure, like of like getting like a story out like quickly versus like other competitors? And like, is that
There can
like,
be.
I see. So like, if there's like immense pressure, like, does that do you guys still like make sure you spend like all the time necessary like to go through like web scrape data, making sure all of it is like?
We definitely try, and I think you've kind of put your finger on one of the scariest and riskiest parts of a lot of this data journalism is we're doing stuff that academics or other people will spend weeks or months on, sometimes in hours or days, you know, and there always is the risk you're going to screw it up, right? And that's a big reason why I love the computational notebooks like Jupyter, is because they can make the entire process reproducible, you know, and like auditable, and like I as an editor, you know, can actually go and edit someone's Python code and like look, you know what I mean? And then like anything, you try to put in integrity checks, you know. So like I was doing this thing last night, and it was where I took someone else's database and I parsed it into a different format and then analyzed it like really quickly. And I saw on their website, they said it should be 4.7 million records. And then after I did the transformation, I did a row count and it was 4.7 million records. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I probably got them all, you know, like things like these simple integrity checks of like, do you have all the records after you read it in? If it's like, if the government produces an annual report about the thing that you're analyzing, can you, even if it's not what you want to analyze, can you reproduce the charts in their annual report using the data yourself, showing that you sort of understand it, you know, and have all the records? Like, you know, the key things are like, do you have everything is like a key issue. And then are you properly accounting for caveats, you know, what's the technical word, artifacts, right? Or other odd things about the data. And so having outside verification of, you know, I can match an analysis that someone else has done is like one way to do it. And then sort of inside verification, which we often rely on, is you as a reporter actually source up the people at the place that generated the data. So like this data I was looking at yesterday, I literally like found the sysadmin who like works there, and I'm like, hey, am I doing this right? You know, and like, and then what do I don't know? What am I missing? Da, 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 you know, and you actually talk to the people who know the data better than you.
Okay, I see. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. At this point, I'm going to inject a couple of questions that are related and follow on from that, I think. So, so there's Edwin and Chung and Meany have all been asking questions that are related to the ethics of these various data analysis situations. So I think they're all interested in different aspects of you know, if your data is complete and you have a Russian, that's an ethical problem, or if you have you know these kinds of issues that you encounter in web scraping and so on.
Yeah, there's a lot of dimensions to that, and I probably can't cover them all off the top of my head, but I'm not an expert on it, but I believe that there is a U.S. Supreme Court case being heard today. Is that right? That actually relates to certain aspects of the legality of web scraping. It's our view that if it's a public website maintained by the government, it is effectively fair game for web scraping, provided we do it in a responsible way that doesn't threaten their infrastructure, you know, avoiding sort of an unintentional DOS attack, you know, by just requesting so many pages. And so ways we will deal with that is, you know, oftentimes before we do a scrape, we'll contact the agency and ask for the data and say, hey, could you just give us the data? Because we don't want to scrape it. If we can get the data, that's easier for us. So we'll ask for the data. We'll when we do the scrapes, we'll set a user agent. Have you ever done this where you can sort of, you know, your browser request contains some identifying information, usually about your web browser, but you're actually able to put any custom string that you want into that message. And so we'll identify ourselves with a contact email in our user agent. And then, you know, when we make the web requests, we'll try to put in a reasonable gap between requests, like a little sleep for like, half a second or something between web requests. I also, like I said earlier, I also like to just do all the scraping at once at the outset so that as I'm parsing and doing that experimenting, I don't have to keep scraping over and over again. You know what I mean? It's just like I just got it down once and then it's just a matter of parsing it. But communicating with people ahead of time is probably the best we can do. Now, there are cases where we scrape things that are not public websites and that have terms of use that some might read to say forbid it. And in those cases, we try to carefully review what's there and see if that's our reading of it legally. And we weigh that against what we think of as the public interest in acquiring the data. Oftentimes, there's a pretty high public interest in providing some oversight of these major tech institutions. And so there's cases where there probably would be disagreement about what we did. There's other aspects of ethics in data that are unrelated to scraping. Just real quickly, one I would raise that I bet people have thought about is the concept, what some people would refer to as doxing. This is situations where you acquire data about individuals and then you kind of have to decide whether or not to publish it. And this is something that comes up a lot in data journalism where there's a lot of things that are public records that people don't realize are public records. And there really is nothing illegal. And depending on your point of view, there's nothing wrong about publishing the line items with individual people, but there also might not be a journalistic sort of rationale or benefit for doing so either. So for instance, we did a story a couple of years ago about the American Independent Party. This is a leftover third party in California that was created by George Wallace, the racist governor from the South, when he tried to run for president in 1968. And he couldn't get a major party, so he created this party that still exists in California as a bit of a zombie effort. And we did a story about how, using a public opinion poll and other things, how many, many, many people, including CEOs, celebrities, government officials, had accidentally become members of the American Independent Party because they thought they were signing up to be politically independent, not member of any party, but the name of the party confused them, so they checked the wrong box. And so everyone who's registered in that party is in a public database. So I have the list of every member of the American Independent Party, and we got that list. It's publicly available, paid $20 or whatever, and we found these famous people and we put them in the story. And then we created a tool that let you look yourself up because the story was about a lot of people are accidentally in this party, and the tool would let you punch in your name and address, and you could look up, am I accidentally a member of the American Independent Party? Now, that tool is just a little custom web tool that I wrote. And I very easily could have written that tool to let you look up your neighbors, your friends, search by address, and fish around in it kind of like I had, right? But we just didn't feel that that was important to the story we were trying to tell. It might distract from it, and it felt a little doxy, you know what I mean? And that is sort of an ethical or editorial decision that we made that other people might make a different decision or disagree with, and so like that kind of stuff comes up a lot. There's been some very controversial examples related to like conceal and carry permits. There's been some small newspapers that have published lists of everyone in their community who owns a concealed weapon or has a license for a concealed weapon, and that's controversial. And so we're always trying to balance it, and I think that every time you do it, somebody's going to disagree with you on either side. That's not an excuse for when you get it wrong, but it's just it's something you always have to weigh.
Cool. Well, I think we have maybe time for one, maybe two questions. Ben, how long do you want to go past time?
I have till 4:30, so I'm not in any hurry. You guys tell me.
You guys are in great luck for those of you that would like to ask questions. Do we have a live voice question?
Yeah. What's your number one advice for somebody trying to go into a data science career, a similar career as yourself? Best thing you can do.
I say this at journalism schools and people make faces at me, but I think you guys will like it. You got to learn to code. I'm sorry. You just got to actually learn to code. You know what I mean? Like, especially I'm from an older generation of data journalists where we all kind of faked it. You know what I mean? But now that it's so core to what we do and such a fundamental skill of the profession, you have to actually learn how to like write a little package and like make something reusable and clean things up and like improve it and be able to explain it to other people or write it in a way that other people can just read it and explain it and take ownership and responsibility for that. Like, no one is born with that. Like, it's not like, oh my God, if I'm not that, I can't do this. You know, it takes a long time to learn that, but I think you have to embrace that apprenticeship and that discipline of gradually just becoming a good coder. You know what I mean? I think that that's important. But you also, to be a journalist, you have to embrace storytelling and economy and clarity and sort of the communication aspect of getting your findings across to other people and realizing that you know, they're not going to start where you end up. You know what I mean? You need to kind of reset from after you've done your analysis and figured out your story and think about how you can present that to people. And that means simplifying things. It means focusing things in. It means finding a story and sticking to it. It means abandoning it if you can't back it up. It means, you know, there's a whole other world of coding, you know, committing to your website being fast, you know, something I'm not as good at as I should be. Yeah.
I had another question. So, how do you manage to be proficient in all these tech stacks? Because it sounds like a lot. You mentioned data science tech stack, a software engineering tech stack.
Yeah, it just takes a while. It takes a while. I think within our group, you'll find people have different strengths or weaknesses. So like of the things you listed, like everybody's kind of better at one thing than another. You know, I've been doing it for 17 years, so I've had a lot of practice. You know what I mean? And I think one way to do it is you really limit what you learn to what you need. You know what I mean? And so there's like a way in which like I'm never gonna get great at NLTK till I have to. You know what I, you know, or whatever, you know, and like you get it. And so like really focusing on only learning what you need to accomplish your next project, right, is like really key. Looking at every project as a challenge or an opportunity to kind of add to that toolkit, so you're like gradually expanding it. And then I think really staying within the mainstream of open source software so that you can benefit from the stuff, you know, all the other people out there are doing to make, you know, Node as strong as it is, to make Python as strong as it is, to make R as strong as it is. So I don't write a lot of Julia code, you know, though I'm sure it's great.
Thank you.
Is there like any open source projects or like with LA Times that we can participate on like GitHub?
Yeah, totally. So if you go to our GitHub, there's a bunch of stuff. I think like the easiest thing for anybody without even contributing is you could like read one of our notebooks and try to run it. You know what I mean? And just like try to reproduce one of our little stories. That would be like a nice little practice thing for someone who wanted to try out Python. I actually have a free Python notebook class I teach, which is at a website called firstpythonnotebook.org. If you go to firstpythonnotebook.org, there's a whole scripted class that will teach you the fundamentals of Jupyter and Pandas to analyze that campaign finance data I was showing you earlier from the California Civic Data Coalition. This is a 6-hour class that I teach to other journalists. And I think kind of practicing some of those fundamentals is a key thing. But as far as contributing, yeah, totally. That campaign finance thing has a whole bunch of tickets. If you message me afterwards, I could direct you to some good ones. I think in our COVID data sets, we have not yet, but we're about to embark on an effort to integrate our web scrapers into the open source repository. And so this is a really, I think, exciting development on GitHub, is Github Actions, which is their kind of continuous integration, like task bot thing. It is free for open source projects, and you can run web scrapers within them and then have it commit the results of the web scraper to GitHub. And which is to me just a game changer. And we have some of these running in the dark. And I think in the next few weeks, my goal is to begin open sourcing them so that we can actually have an open source community of people maintaining COVID scrapers, you know, which I think is really exciting kind of possibility. If you message me, I can find other stuff. I'm just going off the top of my head, but there's a lot. If you check out our GitHub, there's a lot there. There's tons of other open source journalism projects to contribute to that are important, that I could also direct you to as well. Yeah.
Hi, Ben. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us.
Yeah. Open elections. That's the other one. Open elections is one you can contribute, right? This is an open source journalism thing for collecting elections data, which is really hot right now. Sorry. Go ahead, Brian.
Oh no. Yeah, you're good. I was just wondering like how it is that you like came or like got to where you are now? Like how is it that like, because I feel like job is kind of niche, like you're like both a programmer
It
and a
is.
journalist, and it's like something that I didn't even think was like a thing until like
Neither did I till I ended up here, man. So don't like feel it's not, how I ended up here is I'm kind of the last of the dinosaurs. I was kind of trained by the previous generations. So like computers were, people think data journalism is new. It's not new, dude. Data journalism has been around since the 60s. It's just, as William Gibson said, it just wasn't evenly distributed, right? So in the 60s and 70s, computers are a thing now. And you had some pioneering reporters who began to use like punch cards and the first personal computers and stuff to do investigative reporting. These are people like Philip Meyer, Elliot Jaspin, Sarah Cohen, and they were the real pioneer. At the LA Times, a guy named Dick O'Reilly, he made the first computerized chart in the LA Times for the 1984 Olympics, for instance. On his personal computer at home, his son helped him write the code. But you had this sort of earlier generation who learned old school data analysis for long-term projects, and they began popularizing it with other journalists, teaching them just enough to do like long-term investigations. And then out of that movement, there was a thing that started at the University of Missouri called NICAR. It's a very dated 80s acronym. It stands for the National Institute for Computer Assisted Reporting, which is what they used to call data journalism. They used to call it computer assisted reporting, or CAR. And at the University of Missouri, they developed educational programs. They had graduate students. They ran conferences, and they in the 80s began to popularize a lot of this stuff within journalism. And I won't tell you my whole life story, but I sort of accidentally ended up in journalism in Chicago. I realized being a nerd was like a way I could do investigative stuff. I went to Mizzou, University of Missouri, and I became a graduate student at NICAR in the early 00s. And that's where I really got to sit down and learn to code. I learned SQL first, right? And I really learned it in the tradition of offline data analysis and investigative reporting, which is kind of the old school. And then what has happened is over the course of my career, the internet has just changed everything. There's all these new entrants bringing different approaches and ideas in. It's been rebranded as data journalism. Things like forecasting and data science and data visualization have sort of like broadened what people are doing. And so I got into it through that old way educationally. But then what I saw when I entered the marketplace is that web development and doing stuff online was really exciting, but also was kind of like my way in. And so I got a job at latimes.com 13 years ago when it was separate from the newsroom. It was its own little corner of people. And I was at that time just sort of like the boutique nerd who was going to try to do weird stuff. And that was at that time was how a lot of people looked at data and news. It was an experimental thing. And what's happened in the time since I've been there is it's just become kind of the mainstream thing, and the things that we produce are really popular and in some cases lucrative. And that work has become more and more mainstream. And so many more people from outside of this little niche world of like one journalism school in Missouri and its weird conferences, like everybody on this call, is now exposed to it and interested to it. So it's much more competitive today, which is, I don't know if I would make it but I kind of came in through that sort of weird folk way of the University of Missouri, MIZ.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to inject two quick chat questions here. So Raj was asking about this, what size group do you normally work projects on, and how like, the size of the group, like how the problem dictates the size of the group, and how you have to manage differences of people
Totally.
on different topics.
Yeah, I mean, it varies, but the teams tend to be between 1 and maybe 5 people. Sometimes it'll stretch above 5 if we're going to deputize a bunch of data entry work or really like farm stuff out. But like for those visual stories that you saw, that's usually 1 to 3 people who get together and try to jam out the standalone story. Ideally, that gets done in anywhere from 1 to 2 days to 1 to 2 weeks. You know what I mean? Those are things we're trying to turn around quicker and attack the news. Our team is young and what we're trying to do is new, and I'm not a very good editor. And so sometimes it'll take 3 or 4 weeks, you know what I mean? But like it really should take, I think ideally from 2 days to 20 days or something to do a visual story. Those bigger applications, which are longer running, more ambitious software projects, or the investigations that we do, which are deeper analysis, more data gathering, those can be between 2 and 5 people, but over a much longer period of time. And so we don't have the perfect formula for this. And organizationally, because it's a new assembly line and a new type of product, there's really not like a well-established industry practice for how to create the teams. I think that most of these teams need at least one kind, they need an editor, someone like, I guess I play that role sometimes, who can help oversee the work. They need a sort of, in the language of software, they need kind of a lead. They need someone on the team who is, practiced and experienced, can handle all the technical challenges. And then you need a couple more people to help with coding, data gathering, et cetera, who can sometimes be junior people who are kind of learning as they go. And so I think in some ways it's kind of a blend between a traditional news projects team, like an investigative team or something, and a kind of agile software team, or like some weird like zombie like mixture of those two things. I like to talk about it in the language of news because I have to run it inside a newsroom where I'm talking to people who don't know anything about software all the time, right? But I think you could do what we were doing in a software company and talk about it with like project manager and, lead developer and like that sort of other type of jargon to describe in some ways a lot of the same roles.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, Owen. Austin is interested in some machine learning. Do you guys do anything else like, and what are the applications that you can imagine here?
We are humble at machine learning, but we have done a few things. I'll give you a couple examples. There's two common cases where machine learning helps data journalists. One is when you need to classify more records than you could ever read, right? Based on patterns or the contents of the text. So an example was, we had done a story about allegations that the LAPD was downgrading aggravated assaults. So an aggravated assault is a crime report where someone brandishes a weapon or threatens to hurt or kill someone. A regular assault is when you just punch somebody, right? And it's sort of how the officer describes the information really decides whether it's one or the other. And one counts as a major crime and the other doesn't. And so you could, quote, juke the stats by downgrading aggravated assaults hypothetically. There was an allegation that this happened. So we filed a public records request, and after a big fight, we got tens of thousands of crime reports from the LAPD, which had very short narratives. They had a text field with, I don't know, a tweet worth of text that was whatever the police officer wrote down describing what happened there, right? And what we wanted to do is go through and classify cases where the key language from the law appeared in the text, right? So, I can't remember exactly, but if someone brandished a knife for a gun, or if someone said, "I'm going to kill you," like those would qualify it as an aggravated assault. And so what we did is we went through a supervised sample of, 500 or 1,000, and we tagged them manually, right? And then we had the computer use our human judgments to apply its best guess to the remainder of the data set, right? To try to identify cases that should have been marked as aggravated assaults, but were not, right? And it worked. And so that's a case where I guess I would call that tagging or classifying or whatever. I'm not an expert on the jargon, was used to help us kind of go over more data than we could go over manually, right? Other examples are bringing structure to semi-structured data. So this is less serious, but the LA Times print newspaper had a database archive of tens of thousands of recipes, but they were all stored in blobs of text in like a big text field. And we wanted to create a recipes database. And so we knew that there was a structure within these that was common, but not ironclad. So everyone is going to have a list of ingredients. Everyone is going to have a set of steps that you follow to create the recipe, right? There's more to it, but those are two examples. So we had some humans go through and tag those elements of the structure in a sample, and then had the computer go through and parse the remainder of the recipes. And it worked almost perfectly. It was able to parse tens of thousands of recipes, in a matter of minutes, because that the text analysis software was kind of smart enough to pick up on the cues and make the decisions. So those are two examples, one serious, one not.
That's brilliant. And it sounds like you, in spite of your participants earlier, already know how to use NLTK.
Not much, trust me. But you can get a lot done with the fundamentals and applying it to the right problem, which is always kind of the challenge. When does this work for us?
Cool. Do we have some more voice questions?
I had another one, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So this sort of interdisciplinary thing with, data science work and journalism, is it becoming sort of more relevant? And if so, is there sort of, resistance to it? What's the view of it?
I don't think there's one universal view. I think there's probably some variety within newsrooms, but if you've paid any attention to the economics of the news industry, you probably know it's in total collapse. I started in the news industry 15 years ago. You can go look this up with the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It's a fundamental fact. The number of people who work in U.S. newspaper newsrooms has been cut in half by 50% in that time, right? So the industry has contracted by one half, or this segment of the industry. And that's due to increased internet competition, the advertising business model being totally redone, the unbundling of a lot of services that newspapers used to have a monopoly on, et cetera, et cetera. And so, we're really an industry in just fundamental, strip mining level change. Speaking of strip, people talk about coal miners, and I have a lot of sympathy for them, but there's been more newspaper jobs lost than coal mining jobs lost. Okay, you can look that up too. So the reality is that in the news industry, things are pretty dire. And so anything that is showing promise of helping us develop a digital audience and doing the type of work that we all see as our ideals and why we're in the business is welcomed, And so I think the data journalism is welcomed where it serves our audience. It helps us do more ambitious stories that we otherwise couldn't do because we wouldn't find them without the data analysis, right? Or we wouldn't be able to tell them as well without the visualization. The COVID story this year has been huge for data journalists. I suspect that the New York Times' COVID tracker is the most read piece of journalism maybe in U.S. history, just in terms of number of people who've read it. You know what I mean? I know our page is the most read in LA Times history. And so there's a way in which these two, there's a big audience, and that's good. And that's, people like that. I think where data journalism has more trouble is where, this won't shock anyone here either. It gets into the forecasting business. I'm not saying that's wrong or bad. I'm not opposed to forecasting, but I would just say it's more controversial. You know what I mean? Because it's, we don't need to unpack that all here, but I think that is a more controversial thing. Or where it has an arrogance that is packaged along with it that the audience or that peers don't really dig. You know what I mean? And so to me, the data journalism that is best is like any journalism that's best. It's one that finds and serves its audience. It's one that tells stories that aren't otherwise being told and that ought to be told. And it's one that helps us, better navigate this crazy world we live in,
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Mr. Welsh, I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you like your job?
I love I love most everything about my job. Again, let's not turn this into like a pity party for me, but I have this is the 262nd consecutive day I've been at work. You know what I mean? The COVID thing has just been overwhelming. It's just such a huge effort to stay on top of. And working from home and remotely and all the other stuff going on in the industry. We had furloughs this summer. Our company was, had a lot of the same struggles about fairness and discrimination internally this year. It's been a long year, but it's been a long year for everybody, and I bet it's been a long year for a lot of people on this call, and I'm grateful that in the middle of that, I have a job that gives me purpose, gives me a paycheck too, in addition to that purpose, and gives me kind of a reason or a way I can get up and can kind of contribute in this time in a way that is meaningful, So I'm pooped.
Plenty of overtime too, I bet.
What's that?
plenty of overtime too, I bet.
Yeah, it's a lot, you know, and I don't want to complain. I know, imagine working in a hospital right now. You know what I mean? I got it pretty easy compared to a lot of people, you know, but I could use a vacation. I'll say that.
Thank you for coming today.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So when you work for the LA Times, at least for your area, like, what are you looking for in like candidates? Are you looking for like someone with like a bachelor's degree, master's, someone who did like
Totally.
maybe like a boot camp instead of like the typical college route?
Yeah, I mean, at the entry level or like, you know, junior people, I'm looking for somebody who is driven to solve problems and tell stories with computers. You know, someone who's breaking into it, they're not going to be a master coder. They're not going to be a master storyteller. That takes a lot of time and effort, unless they're like a genius or whatever, which I don't know if I even believe in that. But like, with very rare exceptions, you know what I mean? Someone breaking into it is still going to be kind of rough around the edges on like the craft, you know? And so I look for people who are rough around the edges with the craft because they've been trying to do it. Like they're like, you know, and I look for people who are committed to figuring it out and to like making things happen on the internet and tell stories. And like that commitment is just like key to one, learning how to code and like fucking struggling through that. It's crucial to carrying any difficult story to its conclusion, because every journalism story is going to have its frustrations. Let me tell you, you have to like embrace that. And so that's what I look for, people who are trying to make stuff happen and they could show me, I made this story with some charts, or I made this data analysis, and I see in them that drive, you know. For people who are more experienced, you know, you're looking for people who've like done that, like they got it down, you know what I mean? They have like, you know, because what the things we're making are an emerging story form. No one's a master at it truly, but there are people who have put in years like getting really good at it. And so I'm looking for people who are really good at making news applications or really good at making these visual stories. You know, that's what I'm looking for. And like, you know, I'm a weirdo, so I like people who are a little weird maybe too, but you know, some that creativity, you know, because to do what we do, you have to want more than just the satisfaction of writing a good piece of software. You know what I mean? I personally feel the satisfaction of writing a good piece of software. I have total respect for people who are much better at it than me. You know what I mean? But to do the journalism thing, you got to kind of have that like, that funk, that spark, that you got to want to do that journalism part, you know?
Gotcha. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have a
All right.
question.
Yeah, sure.
So you mentioned your audience.
Yeah.
So my question is, how does your user's mental model affect the visualizations that you use? Such as a particular trademark that has stayed consistent in your work? Or how do you change it, or how do you build around your trademark?
Dude, it's a great question. I don't have the answer to it. I think that you've kind of hit on a pretty intellectual and kind of, I think, smart critique of like data journalism in general, like a lens to look at it through that I don't think has really been thoroughly done. You know, it's like, what are the assumptions of a piece of data journalism? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Between me and the hundreds of people on this call, I think the assumptions of a lot of New York Times data journalism is that the person reading it is wealthy. You know what I mean? I think that there are like things that are baked into any journalistic product or any piece of art, you know, that are there. Like for me, you know, the thing I always keep in mind, and this is it's so facile that you might just dismiss me, but like there's a guy named Sean Carter who's an innovator doing this at the New York Times in the OOs, who did like Flash graphics, and he was really kind of ahead of the curve on this. And what he always said that stuck with me is he said, every graphic I make, I think this graphic has to work for Bart Simpson and it has to work for Lisa Simpson. And that you have to have sort of the simple takeaway, the clarity, right? And then you also want to have that more sophisticated, nuanced thing for the reader who wants more. So that's one way of looking at it. I think that there's more requirements-based, sort of like maybe more organized ways of thinking about it, like accessibility. Does this chart actually meet all of the accessibility checklists of being readable by people who don't have great eyesight or who are on a screen reader? Like that's one way to think about it that I think is really valuable. And then I think there's stuff as far as the audience. The biggest change in the last few years is the mobile revolution. the majority of people who read the news now do it on a phone. So more than 50% of people who read one of our stories are doing it on a very small screen. And we need to adapt the charts we make to that. Every chart has to work on small screens. It's more important that they work on small screens than large screens. They have to load quickly. And so that's why you don't see the type of intricate interactive graphics that Sean Carter used to make in 2008 in 2020, because all those knobs and bells or whistles or the wide layout and the small type just doesn't translate to a phone, and so you've seen more and more graphics departments, making simpler, faster graphics.
Oh, yeah, I understand. Okay. And then like you would say for like more mobile people, right? Twitter has become like an exceptional use of, people are obtaining data from there, and
Totally.
they're using that as like a source outlet for news.
We
So,
also
like,
have to think about, publishing on other platforms. So
Yeah.
how do you have like a share image, or how do you maybe make a tweet thread, or, that kind of thing? Or how do we do an Instagram story? Those are my favorites. We could do little Instagram stories with 2 or 3 graphics. They're actually kind of cool.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't even like Instagram.
So I'm going to inject one more chat question that's been waiting for a bit.
Yeah.
Ethan Land was asking a bit of a general question. What's the most surprising thing that you didn't know you had to learn?
How to code? Like if you told me that 20 years ago, I accidentally got into this. I'm just like one of these random people who kind of just followed the leader and ended up where I am, followed the wind. And so to me, when I was your age, I was like a English major, and I didn't know how to code at all. And I was interested in journalism primarily for investigative reporting and sort of my like punk rock attitude of, 1999 or whatever. And so to me, the I guess surprising to me is that I've kind of developed a craft or a discipline and a technical skill, which is, I guess is not something I ever thought I would do in my life, and I kind of have, but I feel like I'm able to balance that and use it in these other different ways. But I found that I actually like the discipline and the skill too, which I didn't expect. I never thought I would like coding, but I actually do. Which is, yeah.
Yeah. And so Ben, it's interesting when you talk about your history and the timing when we got into this.
Yeah.
I think that probably today's kids are in a very, very different situation. At the path to same location might look very different today than it did when you did it. Do you have any insight into how that might go down for them? Or
Well, I think the thing I see with our young people is that if you develop the skill set that you're going to learn in this program, you're going to have a really lucrative skill. You know what I mean? There's going to be opportunities for you to work in corporate America or in government or in, I don't know what, probably the defense industry if you want to, you know what I mean? That are going to pay you very well, are going to be very secure, and will be very good jobs. You know what I mean? And the journalism industry is almost certainly not going to be able to offer you that. And so I think I think if you want to do the journalism thing, you kind of have to take the leap and just and try to break in at the lower level, right, as you're developing the technical skills in parallel, rather than like go the technical route and like cross over, which I think will be more difficult later on. I could be wrong about this, but that's kind of my hunch. I think that you need to get in where you can.
Along those lines, journalism is got its problems now. If people are interested in data for the public good, do you see like other careers that they might consider?
Oh my God, there's so many. Yeah. I mean, you could come work in data science at the LA Times and help us build our subscriber base and like actually save the LA Times. You know what I mean? Like you could like, no, seriously, like these people who are figuring out subscriber retention and all that marketing stuff, which like a journalist might like blow by and not think about, they are the people who will save the LA Times. Like I truly believe that, you know what I mean? Because the digital subscriptions, which has data science at its core, is so important. Oh my God. But I think that there's other places like public policy, activism, and a lot of these social science kind of based like policy groups all need people who are better at data and coding than they have. Like I mentioned the Advancement Project earlier. That's a Los Angeles based nonprofit that looks at racial disparities, you know what I mean, in policing, in health outcomes, and all kinds of stuff. They need help. I mean, if there ever was a year, 2020 is it to want to become an epidemiologist, you know, oh my God, you know, so important. That's actually where R comes from, is that really world, even though I made fun of R earlier. It also might be saving the world right now, you know what I mean, as it plays a role in helping us understand the spread of the virus, but also helping to develop responses to it that are targeted and smart and that will work and save lives, you know?
Very cool. Well, I mean, Ben, you have been so generous with your time, and I think we've gone way past. I also want to let you know, though, that the chat has been filled with lots and lots of thank yous and kudos, and wow, that's so amazing. That I'm gonna have to copy it all for you and send it so you can hang it on your wall there. Then.
Okay, I'm gonna drop my email in there, so if anybody wants to talk, that's my email right there.
All right. So Ben's thrown his email in the chat, and I really want to thank everybody for showing up for questions. I think we all owe you a debt, Ben.
Mhm.
And hopefully maybe some of the students around here that have heard, you know, projects that you have going on that they can pick up and maybe do a little assist on the side to crunch those data.
Mhm.
So cool. Okay. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
And everybody stay safe and enjoy the rest of your night. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me, everybody. Good luck with your finishing your semester, and I hope everybody who spread around the world can enjoy San Diego soon.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.